Hey guys, tonight we slip back into a world where the jungle breathes and muskets echo through the trees. The soil under your feet is thick with red clay and tension. You're standing on the edge of the Kwanzaa River in 17th century Central Africa, near the borders of a kingdom unraveling. The trees whisper secrets, but the louder noise, the one rattling through your chest, is the thunder of Portuguese gunfire not too far off. The kingdom of Ndongo is bleeding. Its warriors fall back. Entire villages vanish overnight, bound in chains and bound for ships you'll never want to see. And in the middle of this chaos, rising like a flame through fog, is one woman, Nzinga. You're about to walk beside her, well, as close as she'll let you, on her path from daughter of royalty to a negotiator so fierce, she'll one day use a human being as a chair without blinking. Spoiler, you probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes in her court. She's got venomous spiders for breakfast and diplomacy for dessert. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you all are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun is high over Ndongo, and your breath sticks to your skin like syrup. You wipe sweat from your brow with a palm leaf you didn't realize was also home to a rather annoyed tree frog. Sorry, little guy. You're walking alongside a crumbling royal caravan, the edges of a dynasty, really. This is the year 1617. The kingdom of Ndongo, once a proud power in Central Africa, is being slowly eaten from the inside by colonial greed and infighting. The Portuguese, equipped with steel weapons and suspiciously cheerful missionary tracts, have made their ambitions clear: land, control, and a never-ending pipeline of enslaved people to feed into their Atlantic empire. Ndongo's current king, Mbandi, is not exactly managing the situation well. He's Nzinga's brother, technically her elder, but you can already tell from the way he nervously taps his royal staff that he's in way over his head. The court is fractured. The nobles are suspicious. And worst of all, every time Mbandi tries to make a bold decision, he looks over his shoulder for his sister's reaction. Which might be wise. Because Nzinga is already a force. Not queen yet, but dangerous in that slow smile, eyes that don't blink way. She was trained in warfare and diplomacy, having sat in on meetings from a young age. Rumor has it she learned Portuguese by eavesdropping on imprisoned Jesuits. Rumor also has it she once scared off a tiger with a firm look, but okay, that one might be village gossip. Still, historians agree on one thing: she was brilliant. Fluent in multiple languages. Sharp-witted. And already, at this point in her life, the kind of woman whose silence could disassemble a man's ego like a jigsaw puzzle. You follow her through the palace halls, what's left of them. The tapestries are fraying. The guards are half-starved. You hear whispers, some nobles saying Mbandi isn't fit to lead, others muttering that Nzinga should take over, but she's a woman. And this? This is 17th century Angola. Women aren't supposed to lead armies. Or countries. Or entire resistance movements. And they certainly aren't supposed to outsmart colonial generals before breakfast. But Nzinga doesn't believe in supposed to. Back outside, a crowd has gathered. Another village has been raided by Portuguese slavers, and the survivors are being questioned. You watch Nzinga kneel beside a woman with a gash on her forehead and eyes that have seen too much. Nzinga listens. She doesn't talk. Just places a steady hand on the woman's arm. That quiet empathy? It's a weapon too. One she'll use more than once. At court, things are unraveling. The Portuguese governor has sent word: submit or perish. Oh, and also, by the way, maybe convert to Christianity while you're at it. It'll look good on paper. Nzinga's brother panics. He decides he needs help, actual, competent help. And so, after years of keeping her at a distance, he sends for Nzinga. He asks her to represent Ndongo in peace talks. She will go to Luanda, the capital held by the Portuguese, and negotiate an end to the fighting. You would think this would be a proud moment. The kingdom's most gifted diplomat called upon to save her people. But Mbandi doesn't see it that way. He doesn't trust her. He's afraid of her, actually. Historians still argue whether this was a last-ditch plea or a desperate attempt to push her into a trap. Because if she failed, the blame would fall entirely on her shoulders. And you're there, right beside her, as she accepts the mission with a smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. The court watches in hushed awe, some relieved, others afraid. One noble, who'll definitely regret this later, whispers, "She's only a woman." You might want to start digging that guy's apology letter now. That night, you sit by her fire as she prepares. She sharpens a ceremonial blade with deliberate care. Not because she plans to use it, but because she wants the governor to see it. Diplomacy, but make it fashion. She tells her attendants to pack her finest clothing, yes, including the feathers. She'll need every inch of that regal glow. Perception is power, especially when your enemies think of you as a pawn. That's when she says something you'll remember forever, just loud enough for the night wind to catch it. They want to deal with a girl, she says, so I will show them a queen. You drift off that night to the sounds of crickets and far-off drums, wondering how on earth she plans to walk into the lion's den and walk back out with peace and pride intact. But hey, you've seen weirder things. Like that one guy who swears he saw Nzinga ride a crocodile across the river. Which is probably not true. Probably. You wake to the dull thud of war drums echoing in your chest. It's just past dawn, and the air already carries the heat of 1,000 stories. Some true, some exaggerated, some whispered only after dark. Today's tale is one of beginnings. Not the explosive kind with crowns and coronations, but the quieter, stranger kind, like a baby born with her umbilical cord wrapped around her neck, as if even the universe tried to strangle her into greatness. You're back in the early 1580s. The Kwanzaa River is still calm, still sacred, and you're standing in a birthing hut woven from reeds and royal expectation. The midwives are panicking. The baby isn't breathing. But the mother, Nzinga's mother, she isn't panicking at all. She just stares, stone-faced, as if she already knows her daughter is more fire than flesh. Then a gasp. That tiny purple bundle lets out a cry so sharp it startles birds from the trees. One of the midwives whispers, "She's a fighter." Another one mutters something about spirits, about omens. And outside, somewhere far off, a snake slithers across a war drum left out overnight. Because of course it does. You follow the child's early days from shadow to sunlight. The royal compound is alive with traders, warriors, and women in embroidered fabrics that ripple like river tides. But Nzinga is not like the other children. She doesn't giggle at dolls or chase lizards. She watches. And not just people. She watches how people are watched. That's different. That's dangerous. She's named Nzinga, a name that carries rhythm and rumor. She's the daughter of Kalanji Kiasamba, a respected king of Ndango. He's clever, respected, and extremely annoyed at the growing Portuguese presence up and down the river. Her mother, reportedly a fierce Kimbundu woman with no patience for nonsense, raises Nzinga with both lullabies and lessons in land politics. By age 7, you're trailing behind her as she mimics the warriors. She builds tiny spears out of reed stalks and demands the village boys fight her. She loses, then wins again. And when one boy refuses to spar, she offers him a deal. He can choose a stick or a story. He picks the stick. Bad choice. By 9, Nzinga speaks Portuguese like she was born into it. Some claim she picked it up by listening through the slats of a mission wall. Others say her father arranged secret lessons with a captured priest who wasn't allowed to say no. Either way, it becomes her weapon of choice. Her father notices. Starts taking her to council meetings. Not officially, of course. That would be scandalous. She's just helping carry scrolls, they say. Sure, scrolls. But even the generals begin to notice the small girl with the sharp eyes who never blinks during war briefings. And one day, when a diplomat stumbles through a translation, she quietly corrects him, without looking up from her papaya. Still, she is a girl in a man's world. Ndango is not without its own prejudices. The royal court is dominated by men who measure power in lineage and bloodshed. So Nzinga carves her own path. She learns both. There's an old tale that says her father once dressed her as a boy and snuck her into a war camp for training. Total myth? Maybe, but you kind of want it to be true. She grows into her teenage years wearing armor and gold bangles, sometimes at the same time. One day, she walks across hot coals during a coming-of-age ritual. Another day, she allegedly tells off a visiting noble by quoting the Bible and a hunting proverb in the same breath. The man gets so confused he agrees to whatever she asked. But not everyone is cheering her rise. Nzinga has siblings. One of them, you've already met, her brother Mbandi. older, technically next in line, and very, very uncomfortable with how fast his little sister is becoming the favorite topic of royal gossip. You notice how his compliments always come with a smirk, how he asks her for advice, but never in front of the court, how his hand lingers a little too long on his dagger whenever she speaks. Sisterhood, it is not. Then the shift happens. Their father falls ill. Slowly, then suddenly, the court tenses. Power leaks through the cracks like floodwater. You see it in the hushed meetings, the secret bribes, the nobles who smile too wide. Mbandi prepares for succession. But Nzinga? She prepares for something else entirely. She spends more time with the army, more time in prayer circles, and more time speaking to the elders, especially the old woman with 3 teeth and no title who's rumored to have dreams that predict coups. One night, Nzinga lights a fire and burns 7 small sticks in the shape of a throne. When you ask her why, she shrugs and says, "Practice." And then news. Their father is dead. Mbandi ascends. Nzinga is left on the sidelines, officially. But unofficially, the new king is clearly not okay. He's paranoid, unstable, and very concerned about imaginary assassins. You watch him banish rivals, exile advisors, even execute a cousin. Then, in a move that will echo for decades, he has Nzinga's infant son, the heir of a different noble line, killed. Just to be safe. You hear the news in the garden. Nzinga doesn't scream. She doesn't cry. She just stops walking. Her hand, which had been petting a goat, stills mid-motion. The goat trots away. And then she says, "So that's the kind of king he's going to be." It's not a threat. It's a promise. You know it. She knows it. And if you listen closely, even the trees seem to hush in anticipation. Historians still argue whether Nzinga immediately began plotting her revenge, or whether she truly tried, for a time, to be a loyal subject. But from the moment her child died, something shifted behind her eyes. Not rage exactly, but calculation. The soft steel of someone who's decided that the throne isn't about blood. It's about control. And someday soon, she'll take hers. You stand in the shadow of a mud brick fortress, watching as a funeral procession winds through the heart of Ndango. The sun has no mercy today. It presses down on the mourners like judgment. But the grief in the air isn't only about the dead. It's about what's coming next. Because now Mbandi is king. And Nzinga? She's been reduced to ceremonial appearances and whispered warnings. Still, you stay close to her, because even when she's silent, it feels like she's moving pieces across a board no one else can see. You're not wrong. As for Mbandi, his reign opens with fanfare and fear. He hosts great feasts, lavish rituals, and then, just casually, orders the execution of half a dozen nobles who didn't cheer loud enough. He surrounds himself with flatterers, yes-men, and a few too many Portuguese advisors who keep saying things like, "Trust us," while slowly sketching maps in their journals. You see the kingdom groaning beneath it all. Villages are abandoned. The slave trade grows more brutal. Portuguese forts start sprouting along the river like iron weeds. Mbandi claims he has it under control, but you notice he sleeps with 3 bodyguards and a dagger under his pillow. The court begins to fracture. And Nzinga? She becomes a ghost in plain sight, everywhere and nowhere. One evening, you walk with her along the riverbank. The moon casts silver across the water, and frogs trill warnings from the reeds. She tells you that her brother isn't the real threat. It's the Portuguese who play both sides. They supply weapons to rivals. They kidnap and convert children. They promise peace while loading slave ships in the next port over. And she says something that freezes you. They don't just want our land. They want our memory. To forget we were ever strong. You believe her. The next morning, Nzinga is summoned to the council, not for input, mind you. Just to look regal while Mbandi announces his latest plan. Mass executions of rival clans and new trade concessions to the Portuguese. You glance at Nzinga's face. She doesn't flinch, doesn't blink, but her fingernails dig into her palm until you see blood. It's all happening so quickly now. Mbandi grows erratic. One day, he gives a speech praising his divine rule, and the next he's weeping in his chamber about betrayal. You're there when one of his advisors is poisoned mid-sentence. The air in the palace thickens with suspicion. You start to look twice at every cup of water. And through it all, Nzinga watches. Some historians say this was the moment she began forming her network. Messengers, spies, loyal clans scattered through the hills. Others believe she was simply waiting, letting her brother destroy himself from the inside, while she stayed close enough to pick up the pieces when he finally cracked. Either way, she's gaining allies. Quietly. Strategically. One of them is a rival queen who gifts her a jaguar tooth. Another is a Portuguese priest who teaches her Latin when no one's looking. Oh, and she's also training in combat. Real combat. Not just swordplay for show. You spar with her once, only once. She knocks you flat with a sweep of her leg and then helps you up, laughing softly. You blinked, she says. But this isn't a training montage. This is survival. Soon after, things go from bad to biblical. The Portuguese escalate their attacks, accusing Nzinga of harboring fugitives. Bandi responds by burning villages that refuse to pay new taxes. You watch people flee in every direction. Families torn apart. Fires on the horizon night after night. And then, the unthinkable, the Portuguese march on the capital. The court descends into chaos. Nobles pack their things. Servants vanish. And Bandi? He goes into hiding. Just disappears, like a terrified shadow. You find Nzinga in the war room, calm as a lake. She's already organizing evacuation routes, issuing orders, and directing guards with a confidence that makes even the old generals shut up and listen. She doesn't claim the throne, not yet. But she does something bolder. She volunteers to negotiate. You blink. She's going to negotiate? With the same Portuguese who murdered her son, enslaved her people, and literally set her kingdom on fire? Exactly, she says. And I'll make them kneel to ask forgiveness. You're not sure if she's joking or prophesying. Before she departs, she changes. Not just her clothes, though those are stunning. Layers of blue and gold, beads that glint like battle scars, and a headdress that makes her look 10 feet tall. But there's something in her posture now. She's not the grieving sister, not the sidelined noble. She's something sharper, a lioness with a diplomat's tongue. The journey to Luanda is tense. Portuguese scouts follow your caravan. Ambushes are rumored. You sleep with one eye open. Nzinga, though, sleeps like a stone. Either she's fearless, or she's got to deal with some very persistent guardian spirits. When you arrive at Luanda, the capital is, well, let's say it smells like old wine, fear, and European entitlement. Portuguese flags flap from stone towers. Cannons line the harbor like teeth. And yet, Nzinga walks in like she owns the place. The governor is waiting. You'll meet him soon. But not yet. Because first, Nzinga kneels to pray. Not to a Catholic god, not this time. She kneels by the river, whispers to her ancestors, and then rises with a look that could slice granite. You're about to witness history. A negotiation unlike anything the world has seen. And trust me, you won't forget the chair. You're standing in the heart of Luanda, where Portuguese flags flutter from every balcony like smug little declarations. This is enemy territory, in case that wasn't clear. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded by people who think your skin makes you furniture. So yeah, no pressure. Nzinga arrives at the governor's palace with her entourage, minimal but deliberate. A translator, a couple of advisors, and exactly one bodyguard who looks like he could take down a rhinoceros with a toothpick. She wears royal blue and gold, with bracelets that chime softly when she walks. Every step says, I am not your victim. I am your equal. And yet, when you enter the reception hall, here we go, the trap is already set. There's only one chair in the room. Just one. A big, velvet-covered monstrosity that looks like it was stolen from a Baroque opera house. It sits smack in the center, flanked by two Portuguese guards with very twitchy trigger fingers. Around it, everyone else is standing, including the governor, seated in his self-declared throne like he invented colonization. You glance at Nzinga. She registers the insult instantly. She's not offered a seat. She's not invited to speak first. She's supposed to stand like a servant and grovel. That's the message. So she does something wild. She nods to one of her servants. Without a word, the servant drops to their hands and knees. Nzinga walks over and, gracefully, casually, sits on their back. Like it's the most natural thing in the world. Like human furniture is just part of court fashion now. And you, trying not to gasp? Yeah, you blink twice and suddenly realize, she just took the power back. The room goes silent. The governor clears his throat. Someone mutters in Portuguese. You hear the word barbaric. Nzinga smiles. And then she speaks, in flawless Portuguese, "Thank you very much," and asks how exactly the governor plans to explain to Lisbon why their guest of honor was denied a chair. That shuts him up. And just like that, the tone shifts. This is no longer a lecture. It's a negotiation. Now, historians still argue whether the servant as chair moment was planned in advance or improvised on the spot. Some say Nzinga carried the idea with her as a symbol of defiance. Others believe she read the insult in real time and flipped it like a coin. Either way, the effect is nuclear. You're witnessing a masterclass. Nzinga lays out her terms calmly. She offers peace. She proposes an alliance between Ndango and Portugal, if and only if the Portuguese agree to several conditions: an end to slave raids, withdrawal from key territories, and recognition of her authority as a representative of the Ndango crown. The governor, caught between ego and interest, tries to negotiate from a position of strength. He quotes trade benefits. He blames the slave raids on overzealous captains. Nzinga listens politely, nods occasionally, and then counters with actual numbers. You didn't even know she memorized figures like that. Rice quantities, river access routes, the exact value of a priest's ransom. She's reciting economic data like she is the central bank. At one point, she even corrects the translator for mispronouncing a Kimbundu word. And yes, she does it mid-sentence, without breaking eye contact. But the true genius? It's in her emotional calculus. Nzinga doesn't just talk politics. She talks pain. She tells the governor stories of families torn apart by the slave trade, of children taken in the night, of the silence left behind when a mother waits for a son who will never come home. And she does it without crying, without begging. Her voice doesn't tremble. It's steady, like a drumbeat. "Do you know what it's like," she asks, "to hear your people scream and know you can't save them all?" The governor looks away. You think, just maybe, you see his hand tremble. Still, diplomacy is chess, not poker. The governor stalls. He says he must confer with Lisbon. He offers vague reassurances and evasive half-promises. But Nzinga isn't here for vagueness. She wants it in writing. Signed, sealed, with the stamp of the Portuguese crown. And after days of back and forth, they give it to her. That's right. You watch as a formal treaty is signed, right there in the same room where she had to sit on a human being to be taken seriously. The governor even tries to present it with a little flourish, as if this was his idea all along. Nzinga accepts the document with a soft smile and not a single trace of sarcasm, which, honestly, makes it even more savage. But here's the kicker. Nzinga doesn't just secure peace. She also manages to get a baptized name out of the deal, Dona Ana de Souza. Well, adopting a Christian identity allows her more flexibility in Portuguese politics. She plays their game, but she writes her own rules. Quirky fact, legend has it that she took her baptism so seriously that she briefly became godmother to the governor's own child. Whether symbolic or strategic, it was the kind of move that makes you stop mid-bite and mutter, "Wait, what?" Now, let's be real, this treaty doesn't solve everything. Spoiler alert, the Portuguese will absolutely break their word. They always do. But in that moment, Nzinga does something unheard of. She negotiates peace with a colonial empire and walks away with dignity, power, and new leverage. And that chair? The one that wasn't offered? It becomes a symbol, a quiet legend, passed down through whispers and lullabies. Not just of rebellion, but of elegance in the face of contempt. A reminder that sometimes you don't flip the table. You sit down on your own terms and make everyone else rise to your level. As you ride back to Ndango beside her, you glance at Nzinga. She doesn't look triumphant. She looks tired, like a warrior who's just won the first round of a 20-year war. But she also looks determined, as if the battle she's really preparing for hasn't even begun yet. The night falls softly over the savannah. Crickets chirp. Somewhere in the distance, drums echo a slow rhythm. And you realize you've just seen the beginning of a legend. You return to Ndango expecting trumpets, celebrations, maybe a feast with palm wine and roasted goat. But what greets you is silence. An uneasy, suspicious silence. The court doesn't trust the treaty. The nobles mumble about betrayal. And Mbandi, your dear brother king, doesn't even show up to welcome Nzinga home. He sends a messenger. Just a messenger. Nzinga listens politely as the young man stammers out some excuse about Mbandi needing time to reflect. Then she does something you don't expect. She sends him back with a gift. Not a warning, not a threat. A carved figurine. It's a crocodile swallowing a spear. Subtle? Not even a little. But tasteful? Absolutely. Things spiral quickly after that. Mbandi grows increasingly paranoid. He accuses Nzinga of conspiring with the Portuguese. He bans her from court. He dissolves any advisory councils that still speak her name with respect. And the best part? He sends a decree forbidding any woman of the royal line from engaging in state affairs without direct approval. Oh yes, he's officially terrified. Now, historians still debate whether Mbandi was always mentally unstable or if paranoia consumed him after Nzinga's diplomatic success. Some argue that he was haunted by guilt, the guilt of selling out to the Portuguese, of ordering purges, of knowing he could never match his sister's intellect. Others think it was simply sibling rivalry pushed to Shakespearean levels. Either way, the writing's on the palace wall. And then he dies. Just like that. Gone. Officially? Suicide. A whispered tale about poison, isolation, and a final breakdown. But you hear rumors. Some say he was murdered by one of his own advisors. Others think Nzinga orchestrated it with a nod and a carefully placed herb. But when someone dares ask her outright, she just says, he was not strong enough for this world. You never really find out the truth. What matters is that there's a power vacuum now. A chasm where a king once stood. And guess who everyone suddenly turns to? You guessed right. But here's the complication. In Ndongo's political structure, women can inherit power, but they're not supposed to hold it. Not outright. Not publicly. The idea of a queen regnant is, let's say, unusual. Okay, fine. It's considered blasphemy by a good chunk of the nobility. Some even quote tribal law that women may not sit alone on the lion's throne. Nzinga doesn't care. She assembles the elders. She stands barefoot before the royal tree where kings are traditionally chosen. She makes her case, not with flattery, not with poetry, but with hard truth. Our enemies are already on our soil, she says. Our allies are too far, our army too weak. I have stood before Portugal and made them listen. Who else among you has done that? You look around. No one speaks. One elder coughs into his beard. Another fiddles with his sandal. Eventually, an old woman in the crowd stands up and simply says, let her try. And that's how Nzinga becomes queen. Not crowned, not enthroned with trumpets, but recognized. Accepted. Sometimes that's the more powerful right. Still, not everyone is thrilled. Several rival nobles flee the capital, claiming she's a usurper. One of them tries to declare himself the true king from a neighboring province and writes very long, angry letters to Portugal. The Portuguese, of course, pretend to be shocked. Oh dear, how unexpected. Nzinga reads their letters over roasted cassava and doesn't even blink. Now, being queen is different from being a diplomat. She's not just negotiating treaties anymore. She's rebuilding an entire kingdom on the edge of collapse. Infrastructure, alliances, military logistics, she has to touch every piece of the puzzle. And you're with her every step of the way. First, she overhauls the army. She invites exiled warriors, trains women in combat, and begins to reorganize Ndongo's ragtag defense into a lean, mobile fighting force. She even introduces mock battle drills, staged in full costume, to test how troops would perform under ambush conditions. You watch one afternoon as she spars against 3 men at once. She wins. Easily. Then she reforms trade. Nzinga knows the Portuguese want slaves and ivory. But she's clever, too clever to play their game blindly. She begins rerouting trade through neutral intermediaries, controlling supply to drive up demand. She's essentially running an embargo, but with flair. And every time a Portuguese trader complains, she sends them a gift basket. With a smile. One of those baskets includes dried monkey skulls and a note that reads, "We are watching." Quirky? Absolutely. Effective? You bet. But there's more. Nzinga doesn't just manage resources, she plays the spiritual game too. You join her one evening at a sacred grove. There, under a canopy of whispering trees, she performs rites older than the kingdom itself. She invokes the ancestors, calls on the spirits of kings past, and then, in a bold twist, she declares herself the spiritual mother of the nation. This is not just religious symbolism, it's political genius. By framing herself as the mother, Nzinga dodges patriarchal hang-ups while seizing the same authority once held by kings. She becomes protector, nurturer, and war leader all at once. It sticks. The people begin to chant her name during harvest. Warriors carve her image into shields. Children are named Nzinga as a blessing for resilience. One traveling poet calls her the iron branch that grows in storms. Of course, peace is a temporary illusion. You know what's coming. The Portuguese grow restless again. The treaty from Luanda starts to dissolve in practice. Slave raids resume in the hinterlands. Allied chiefs are bribed to switch sides. Fortresses expand like tumors across the map. Nzinga doesn't panic. She watches. She waits. Then she calls a council, not just of nobles, but of commoners, warriors, elders, and healers. She asks them one question: do we bend or do we bleed? They answer her in unison: we fight. And you feel it right then. This isn't diplomacy anymore. This is preparation. War is coming. But this time, Nzinga will be ready. Not just with words. With strategy. With fire. With the full weight of a people who finally believe in her. The queen is not just sitting on a servant now. She's sitting on history itself. You're standing at the edge of a war camp now, except it's not a mess of tents and smoke and muddy boots like in the movies. No, this one is surprisingly elegant. Organized. It smells like roasted maize and wet earth, and at the center of it all is Nzinga's new command tent, painted with sweeping designs in indigo and blood red. The ground beneath your feet hums like it knows what's coming. Nzinga steps out in full battle regalia. She's not dressed in armor. No, that would be too predictable. She wears leather, feathers, and beads that rattle softly when she moves. Her face is painted in black clay stripes that make her eyes look like they're glowing. You can barely look away. This is not the Nzinga who negotiated treaties. This is Queen Nzinga, commander of the resistance. The Portuguese thought they could ignore her, that she'd settle into her throne and become another regional ruler too busy hosting banquets to care about border raids. She starts with a hit-and-run strategy. Mobility is the name of the game. Her troops, newly trained, fiercely loyal, strike at Portuguese outposts at night, melting into the forests before anyone can retaliate. They sabotage supply lines, intercept slave convoys, and burn down garrisons that thought they were untouchable. One raid is so perfectly timed that it interrupts a Portuguese officer's birthday dinner. He flees barefoot into the woods, his cake still half-eaten. His hat is later found stuffed with snakes. Quirky? Extremely. Tactical? Surprisingly effective. Nzinga's forces don't hold territory, they deny it. And the Portuguese? They're not used to that. They're built for fortress warfare, for defending walls and lobbing cannonballs at people who stand still. Nzinga doesn't stand still. She dances through them like a breeze with knives. But she knows even the breeze can't last forever. So she starts building alliances. Big ones. Strategic ones. First, she reaches out to the Mbangala, a fierce warrior society known for extreme rituals and unmatched battlefield brutality. Think human leopard hybrids with axes and no bedtime. They're terrifying, yes, but also deeply respected. And Nzinga? She doesn't try to tame them. She joins them. Now this part historians love to argue over. Some claim she fully adopted Mbangala customs, including ritual cannibalism and sacred infanticide. Others insist she cleverly appeared to, without fully engaging in the darker rites. What's clear is that she earns their loyalty through shared battle, not speeches. She even swears a blood pact with their leaders under a lunar eclipse. And let's be honest, that's just cool. The Portuguese begin to panic. They send letters back to Lisbon claiming she's summoned demons, that the jungle fights for her, and that our Christian soldiers face not a queen but a witch. Meanwhile, Nzinga intercepts one of their reports and laughs so hard she nearly spills her palm wine. But she doesn't just rely on brute force. You see her study the terrain like it's a lover's map, every valley, every hill. She builds secret tunnels beneath swamps, constructs decoy camps, uses trained birds to deliver messages when human runners are too slow. Her battlefield becomes a stage, and every act is designed for maximum disruption. She knows they're coming next for her capital, so she burns it. Yup. You stand next to her as smoke rises over what used to be a proud city. Not out of surrender, but out of strategy. If they want ashes, she says, I'll give them ashes too hot to hold. Then she vanishes. Like, actually vanishes. One moment you're marching with her through the highlands, the next she's disappeared into the dense forests of Matamba. And that's where she makes her next big move. She takes Matamba. Now Matamba is no small province. It's a whole separate kingdom with its own nobles, trade routes, and power structure. But they're leaderless at the moment, fractured and vulnerable. So Nzinga rides in, seizes the capital, and declares herself queen of Matamba. Just like that. And here's the spicy bit. She doesn't do it with swords alone. She marries into the royal line, forming a political union that blends blood with power. The people accept her, partly because they're tired of war, but mostly because she offers them something the Portuguese never could: dignity. Suddenly, her influence doubles. She now rules both Ndongo and Matamba, uniting the central Angolan interior under one resistance banner. And from Matamba, the game changes. She launches a full counteroffensive. She cuts off trade routes to Luanda. She builds a shadow network of spies, some disguised as traders, others as Catholic converts. She even starts sending false surrender letters to confuse Portuguese officials, some of whom literally argue in court over whether she's actually dead. She's not. She's drinking tea on a ridge while they debate. Quirky fact, at one point, she allegedly sends a peace envoy wearing perfume made from the bones of Portuguese soldiers. Again, rumor, possibly exaggerated, but it gives her this vampire queen aura that terrifies enemies and delights poets. Still, it's not all victory songs and moonlit dances. The cost is high. You see children training with wooden spears because they've run out of iron. You watch Nzinga send her own niece into exile to protect her from Portuguese assassins. There's a night when a storm washes away half the food stores, and Nzinga eats only boiled roots for a week to match the soldiers' rations. You begin to realize, she's not fighting to win. She's fighting so that the fight doesn't die. Because if she stops, if she yields, then the Portuguese don't just take land, they take the story. The right to say what happened. To write history without her in it. And Nzinga will not be erased. Not while she breathes. You fall asleep under Matamba's stars that night, listening to the soft clang of distant forges. Somewhere nearby, Nzinga sharpens her sword while humming an old lullaby. And you understand, this queen isn't going anywhere. She is the war. You wake to the sound of drums, not the kind you dance to, but the kind that say, "Wake up, pack fast, someone's about to get ambushed." The ground vibrates under your feet as Nzinga's scouts return breathless, reporting Portuguese troops moving through a ravine to the east. Nzinga doesn't blink. She just says, "Good, let them." You follow her through tall grass that whistles like snakes. Her warriors are already in formation, crouched behind rocks and brush like panthers waiting to pounce. This is the trap she's been waiting for. The ravine is narrow, steep, and easy to flood. And right on cue, when the Portuguese convoy enters, boom. Logs come tumbling down from hidden slopes, followed by mudslides, nets, and the ear-splitting war cry of Matamba's finest. It's over in minutes. The Portuguese barely manage a counterattack. Nzinga surveys the wreckage, not with glee, but with measured calm. Then she turns and tells her soldiers, "Collect what's useful. Burn the rest. No spoils of war if they slow you down." This ambush becomes a symbol, passed down in whispered stories, exaggerated into legend. Some say she summoned the mudslide with a prayer. Others swear the forest trees bowed to help her. But the truth? She just knew the terrain better. One mainstream fact that makes it into history books. This ambush was one of the most successful guerrilla operations against colonial troops in the 17th century. Nzinga, with fewer men, inferior weapons, and no cannons, dismantled a fully armed Portuguese regiment with wit and terrain mastery. But of course, school books tend to trim out the drama. They never mention the rain smelled like blood and orchids that day. And now, things really heat up. The Portuguese are done pretending. They name her public enemy of the crown, offer rewards for her capture, and send a fleet to fortify Luanda. And in a twist that would make any action movie proud, they call in reinforcements from Brazil. Ships full of seasoned troops, muskets, and slave-catching captains fresh from terrorizing the Americas. Nzinga doesn't flinch. She does something you don't expect. She writes letters to the Dutch. See, the Dutch are currently in a love-hate relationship with Portugal. On one hand, they're fellow Europeans. On the other, they're business rivals. And right now, business wins. Nzinga offers the Dutch something Portugal never would: access. Trade routes, ivory, influence, maybe even shared profits from the coast, if they'll just help her push the Portuguese out. And, miracle of miracles, they agree. She meets with Dutch envoys in secret, dressed in white with gold thread. One writes home that she speaks as though she commands heaven itself. He's not far off. With Dutch guns, Nzinga prepares for the long game. Now here's the quirky bit. She begins importing not just weapons, but tailors. Dutch tailors, specifically. Apparently, she believes that looking like an equal to European powers means dressing like one, on her terms. So she starts mixing European fashion with Mbangala flair. Ruffled collars with bone necklaces. velvet with jaguar pelts. It's to look, and it works. She hosts Dutch captains in candlelit feasts while her soldiers line the hills in full war paint. It's dinner and a message. This is our land. You are guests. But even with new allies, nothing comes easy. There's betrayal. One of her lieutenants, someone she trusted, sells troop movements to the Portuguese in exchange for a Portuguese title. She finds out, of course, has him brought to her tent. What she does next becomes the stuff of legend. She sits him down, pours him wine, tells him a story about a hyena who tricked his own pack. And then she feeds him his own signed betrayal letter. No, really. Makes him eat the parchment, one corner at a time. Then she nods once. He's taken away. No one sees him again. Brutal? But effective. No one betrays her after that. Still, the war drags on. The Portuguese regain ground along the rivers. The Dutch prove unreliable, always weighing profits more than promises. Some of them start flirting with Portuguese diplomats again, hoping for better trade terms. Nzinga sees it coming. She doesn't scream or threaten. She simply starts planning without them. She builds a fortress deep in Matamba, one that can't be seen until you're standing right in front of it. Carved into a cliffside, with trapdoors, secret passageways, and enough storage to outlast a siege. You spend weeks helping haul supplies, hearing stories whispered by guards that Nzinga sleeps on stone so she never forgets the weight of war. But inside that fortress, something else happens too. She starts educating children. Yes, in the middle of a war, Nzinga builds a school. Not a giant one, just a small, circular chamber where elders teach history, math, and military tactics. If the sword fails, she says, the mind must not. You sit in on a lesson one day and watch a 10-year-old girl out-argue a visiting Dutch officer. The man laughs and says, she sounds like her queen. The girl says, she is my queen. And for the first time, Nzinga smiles. Now, you'd think at this point the Portuguese might offer another treaty. And they do. Sort of. But this one? It's full of loopholes and vague promises. Nzinga reads it once, sets it down, and says, they do not want peace. They want pause. Historians still argue whether she missed a chance here, whether accepting the treaty might have saved more lives. But Nzinga? She isn't trying to save lives with words anymore. She's trying to protect a future where her people don't need to negotiate their freedom every decade. So she sharpens her machete, looks out over the valley, and prepares for another long night of resistance. You're sitting by a fire tonight, the smoke curling up into the stars as Nzinga hums a tune no one recognizes. She's not in armor. She's not giving orders. She's just thinking. You can tell because she's doing that thing where she twirls her drinking gourd by the rim, slowly, like she's winding up a spell. She turns to you and says, it's not enough to fight them on the field. We must beat them in the story they tell. And with that, Queen Nzinga launches her boldest campaign yet, not on the battlefield, but in the hearts and minds of her enemies and allies alike. She knows by now that brute force won't free her kingdoms forever. So she sets her sights on legacy. You start seeing it in small ways. In how she renames villages with symbols of resistance, Hope's Edge, Blood Rain, Lion's Memory. In how she commissions songs and epic poems to be performed in marketplaces, celebrating not just her victories, but the resilience of her people. These songs travel faster than any horse. Even faster than gossip. You visit one village where children play Nzinga and the Cannons, taking turns pretending to leap over fort walls with wooden spears. It's adorable until you realize they know every battle strategy she's used. These kids aren't just playing, they're learning. She rewrites what it means to be Angolan. And now, she begins reaching out to other African rulers, not for help, but for unity. She sends emissaries to Congo, and even rival Ndemba leaders with a single question: what will be left of us if we kneel one by one? This doesn't sit well with the Portuguese. They start a smear campaign. Priests preach that Nzinga is a demon in human skin, that she consorts with witches and walks through fire. One Spanish friar even claims she flew over a fortress in the shape of a bat. Honestly, you kinda wish that one were true. So Nzinga strikes back with her own subtle magic, diplomacy mixed with theater. She begins sending carefully curated portraits of herself to European courts, each one different. In one, she's painted as a devout Christian queen in prayer. In another, she stands in Amazonian regalia, with a sword dripping something red. And in yet another, she's seated calmly on a lionhide throne, eyes unblinking. It's brilliant. No one in Europe can agree on who she is. Warrior? Sorceress? Maybe all three? And so, they hesitate. This is where things get particularly fascinating. Nzinga begins converting, publicly, to Christianity. Wait, what? She takes on the name Ana de Souza, again, and declares herself a Christian ruler. She rebuilds churches destroyed in earlier conflicts, has her soldiers baptized in mass ceremonies. She even reinstates Catholic holidays across her territories. Now, historians love to debate this move. Was it genuine faith? Or cold strategy? Some say her return to Christianity was sincere, born of reflection and age. Others argue it was pure politics, a way to curry favor with Portugal and its allies, knowing she'd need diplomatic leverage to secure lasting peace. But one thing is certain, she never lets go of her power. In these church ceremonies, she still sits highest. When priests preach, they do so under her rules. One priest complains that she interrupts his sermon to correct him on scripture. Another is forced to flee after referring to her as a lesser woman. Nzinga responds by sending him a Bible with the word queen etched on every page where it had said king. You're there the day she receives an envoy from Portugal who dares to suggest she must disband her army if she's serious about peace. She sips her tea, sets the cup down, then calmly says, "If peace means disarming you first." He doesn't stay long after that. Still, behind the poise, you can feel the years catching up. Her hair is streaked with silver now. Her steps are slower, but her mind? Still razor sharp. She spends long nights reading maps, dictating letters, and listening to reports from every corner of her domain. She barely sleeps, says dreams are for people who've finished building the world they want. You follow her through one last village tour, where people bow, cheer, and press trinkets into her hands, hand-carved lions, palm leaf crowns, poems scratched into bark. One old woman hands her a stone and says, "You made it possible to carry this again." "What is it?" you ask later. Nzinga smiles faintly. "A grave marker. For a child taken. The Portuguese banned them. Said the dead needed no names." She runs her thumb over the rough etching. Now they remember again. It hits you, her war wasn't just about borders. It was about memory. About making sure that no child, no village, no resistance song could be erased. And so, as whispers of another peace treaty begin floating again, this time more genuine, more balanced, you sense a shift. The Portuguese are tired. Their empire is stretched. The Dutch have backed away. And Nzinga? She's ready to make her final move. But this time, it's not a trap. It's a transition. She begins grooming a successor. A niece, brilliant, fierce, and already fluent in Portuguese, Dutch, Latin, and swordplay. Nzinga holds councils with her, shares stories, maps, regrets. "Do not become me," she says one night. "Become better." And so, while the final peace treaty slowly, painstakingly takes form, you walk with Nzinga through her capital one last time. Children run past. Elders nod with respect. The market bustles. And in the center of it all, a statue is being carved, not of her in war paint, but in full robes, seated calmly. Yes, seated. And you remember that first throne, the one she made of a servant's back. Now, this one is carved of ironwood and stone. Permanent, heavy, symbolic. She will no longer need to rise by force. She has risen. You're standing under a sycamore tree as the treaty papers are handed over, sealed with wax, stamped with all the pomp Portugal can muster, and yet, you can see the tremble in the diplomat's hands. He knows this isn't a surrender. It's a compromise. And not a generous one. It's a treaty they've been cornered into. Nzinga takes the scroll, unrolls it slowly. The wind lifts one edge like even nature's trying to sneak a peek. Her eyes scan every line, twice. Then she nods once and says, "We will live. And they will remember." You breathe out. You hadn't realized you were holding your breath. After 4 decades of war, alliances, betrayals, reinventions, and negotiations so sharp they could slice steel, Queen Nzinga of Ndongo and Matamba has forced the colonial powers into recognition. Not as a vassal, not as a puppet queen, but as a sovereign equal. The terms? Complex, of course. Portugal agrees to recognize her rule over Matamba and withdraw military forces from key regions. Nzinga agrees to resume trade and maintain Christian decorum, whatever that means this month. No forced tribute, no humiliating fealty. A handshake treaty between 2 lions pretending to be lambs. Mainstream historians usually cite this 1657 treaty as Nzinga's final triumph. It marked a rare moment where a European empire recognized an African ruler without the usual tricks, conversion, annexation, or sheer conquest. But most textbooks don't capture the weight of it. The way her people celebrated not with fireworks but with silence. With stillness. Just relief. Nzinga retires from battle after that. Doesn't mean she disappears, oh no. She just changes uniforms. Now she's in full queen mode. Robes that trail like rivers behind her. Gold rings stacked up her arms like armor made of sunrise. Her council chambers become the new battleground. You see her crushing foreign trade envoys with nothing more than a raised eyebrow and a politely coughed, "You expect me to sign that?" She reorganizes her government too. Implements taxation systems that actually work, based on output and rainfall instead of colonial-imposed quotas. Begins appointing village elders to council seats. Creates incentives for former warriors to become traders, diplomats, educators. Her once war-torn capital becomes a regional center for culture and governance. Merchants arrive from the interior, the coasts, and even, cautiously, from Luanda. A new currency is introduced, seashell-based, beautifully carved, and nicknamed Nzinga's Whispers, because the coins feature her profile in the softest etchings. One quirky side project? She funds a group of local artisans to invent and popularize a musical instrument based on Dutch violins but made from hollowed gourds and sinew. It produces a sound somewhere between a cello and a lullaby. It becomes the soundtrack to a new era, war memory turned into melody. Now, you'd think everyone would be happy. But peace brings its own politics. The Portuguese, predictably, test her. They start slipping terms into trade contracts that suggest Matamba is a friendly dependency. Nzinga responds by rewriting the language and sending it back with a note that reads, "Your quill must have stuttered." Jesuit priests return, requesting a new church be built. Nzinga agrees, then insists it be constructed by local architects, using traditional design. The result is a Christian chapel with a thatched roof, mud walls, and a baptismal font shaped like a calabash. Some missionaries call it blasphemous. Others call it genius. And through it all, Nzinga teaches. Not in a classroom, but by example. Every decision, every refusal, every quiet nod or sharp question becomes part of an unspoken curriculum. Young nobles watch her hold court. Children mimic her speech. Even former enemies start copying her negotiation style. She's becoming myth while still alive. And that, of course, has its dangers. One night, you sit with her beneath the stars as she sips something bitter from a clay cup. She says, "They'll try to tame me in the history books. They'll call me exotic, unusual, maybe mad." You ask, what do you want to be remembered as? She considers, as someone who refused. Then she chuckles. And maybe also someone with excellent taste in shoes. You look down and sure enough, her sandals are embroidered with tiny metal lion heads. Because of course they are. But legacy takes effort. She commissions scribes to record her story, her version of it. She has elders dictate oral histories, carefully annotated. She insists on dual translations, one in Portuguese, one in Kimbundu. If only one side writes the story, she says, they'll write me into a corner. And here's where the scholarly arguments start heating up again. Historians still argue whether Nzinga's final years were a retreat or a masterclass in political finesse. Some say she domesticated herself to fit into a European framework. Others argue she bent that framework to her will so completely that she made submission look like sovereignty. You've watched her toss out Portuguese maps and draw her own borders by hand. You've seen her teach small children how to bow without bending. You know, she won. You can feel it most in the way her people move now, less hurried, more grounded. Traders hum as they walk. Old women laugh in the market. And in the city center, a new festival is declared, the Day of the Turning Throne. Celebrated every year on the anniversary of the treaty, it commemorates that one moment, so long ago now, when Nzinga sat on a servant's back and forced the world to see her. But now, there's a new tradition. On that day, no one sits on chairs. Everyone sits on the ground together. Equal. From the nobles to the blacksmiths. It's a strange inversion of hierarchy, but somehow, it fits. You walk past Nzinga one morning during this festival. She's seated on the earth, legs crossed, sipping maize beer from a calabash. Children climb trees around her. One small girl offers her a flower. Nzinga takes it, smiles, and whispers, "Tell your grandchildren I sat here willingly." The girl nods solemnly. "I will." And somehow, you believe her. The rains are late this year. Nzinga watches the sky with narrowed eyes, as if daring the clouds to explain themselves. You're with her on a low hill, not far from the capital, where she's come to oversee the construction of a new water storage system, her latest obsession. A queen doesn't just prepare for war, she tells you. She prepares for drought. It's a simple line, tossed out like a joke. But you know better by now. Nzinga's greatest victories don't always come with trumpets. Some are quiet, strategic, hidden in the folds of preparation. In her twilight years, Nzinga shifts her gaze even more toward infrastructure. While the warriors still patrol the borders and the diplomats still write careful letters, she's out here inspecting irrigation ditches. You follow her through rice paddies, past rows of cassava and maize, where she quizzes farmers on rainfall patterns and pest cycles like an agrarian schoolteacher. Turns out you can win a war with food too. Trade routes that once funneled people into slavery are now filled with grain, textiles, and salt. Nzinga opens up river crossings, sends guides to mark safer roads, and commissions wells to be dug in every major settlement. People don't rebel when their bellies are full, she says one day, as she samples a roasted yam that's still too hot to eat. And yet, Nzinga never fully trusts peace. She keeps a network of spies. Old ones, young ones. Some disguised as wandering bards, others as foreign priests or palm wine sellers. They return to her like owls in the dark, whispering what the Portuguese plot, what the Dutch consider, what her own nobles mutter when they think she's not listening. That's how she catches wind of a Portuguese proposal to create a trade protectorate over Matamba. She laughs so hard when she hears the term, she nearly drops her bowl of calabash soup. Protectorate? Are they bringing blankets and bedtime stories next? But behind the joke, her eyes harden. She knows they're waiting for her to die. And yes, the years are beginning to show. Her gait slows. Her voice softens, though never loses its bite. The days when she could swing a sword or leap onto horseback are behind her, but her mind remains sharper than obsidian. Old age is a kind of warfare, she tells you once, rubbing her aching joints. Your body rebels. You learn new tactics. Still, it's not all aches and suspicions. Nzinga begins writing letters, not just diplomatic ones, but personal ones. Messages to her niece, to village elders, to children born during the peace years. She writes of leadership, sacrifice, strategy, of fear and fury and triumph. She ends many with a phrase that becomes quietly famous. Remember who we were and choose what we will be. You see her more often in reflective moods now. She walks at dusk, alone sometimes, or with her niece, speaking softly about stars and stones. One evening, you catch her drawing a spiral in the dirt with her cane. It's not a straight path, she murmurs. Power, resistance. It loops, comes back to test you. You try to respond, but she lifts a hand. Wait, listen. From the valley below, you hear drums. Not war drums. Festival rhythms. A local wedding celebration has spilled into the streets. Children shriek with laughter. A grandmother sings. That, Nzinga says, is the sound of peace. She smiles. And for a moment, you see the girl she once was, back in that royal court so long ago, where she learned to calculate and survive, to lead and to fear nothing but forgetting. Historians still argue whether Nzinga knew the end was near. Some say she sensed it and carefully prepared her succession to preserve the fragile balance of peace. Others believe she fought time itself, hoping to outlive the next Portuguese trick. A few fringe scholars even claim she never died, just vanished into the forest, waiting to rise again if Angola ever called her name. But you were there. You watched as Nzinga held her final council session. She wore a blue robe stitched with silver threads and a necklace made from polished river stones. Her voice trembled only once, when she spoke of the treaties, the battles, the sacrifices. Then she turned to her niece and said, "You will be wiser than me, because I taught you my mistakes." She stood, handed her a carved staff, a simple piece of dark wood with a lion's head, and stepped down from the throne. Not onto a servant, but onto the floor. Equal. She sat beside her niece, not above. Looked up, not down. It was quiet for a long time. Then someone began to clap. Another joined. And soon, the chamber thundered with applause. Not out of obligation, but out of awe. It was the only time Nzinga accepted such praise without waving it off. Afterward, she walked outside into the sun, stretched her arms like someone waking from a long nap, and whispered something you couldn't hear. Maybe a prayer. Maybe a farewell. That night, she asked for a fire, a warm drink, and the company of storytellers. She listened with her eyes closed, smiling as old warriors and young dreamers told stories about a queen who had once made a throne out of defiance. She passed in her sleep, they say. A soft sigh. A slow exhale. A closing of the eyes beneath a full moon. Her funeral shook the land. Not from noise or spectacle, but from the silence that followed. Entire towns paused for days. Drums were covered. Markets closed. Traders refused to speak above a whisper. And when the mourning ended, something beautiful happened. Across Matamba and Dongo, families began retelling her stories, not just the ones of battle, but of resilience, wit, and strategy. Children began pretending to be Nzinga in their games again. And elders said her name before every meal. Not as a prayer, as a fact, as a reminder. And high on that hill above the capital, where the wind never stops moving, a great stone throne was placed. Empty. Waiting. Not for her return, but for the idea of her. So that whenever someone forgets what strength looks like, they can look up. And remember, you return to the capital years later. It looks different now, more polished, more bustling, but not unrecognizable. The mud brick buildings have grown taller, their walls now reinforced with timber beams. Vines curl lovingly up the sides of council chambers, and the central marketplace hums with activity from dawn till dusk. But the statue is new. It stands at the city's heart, Queen Nzinga, carved from black stone, not on a throne, not holding a sword, but standing. Her eyes cast forward. One hand open to receive, the other clenched, ready to defend. Children touch the base for good luck. Merchants nod to it when they pass, like greeting an old friend. And somehow, you swear she winks at you. Her niece, now Queen Makambu, rules with a quiet confidence that echoes her aunt's. You watch her chair debates with calm precision, interrupt a boastful general with a single raised eyebrow, and recite treaties from memory. The room listens when she speaks, not out of fear, but out of habit. Nzinga taught her well. What fascinates you most isn't the politics, it's the everyday echoes. You see a woman wearing her hair braided into coils just like Nzinga once did, decorated with tiny cowrie shells. A street performer mimics the queen's famous posture from the servant throne, incident, sitting cross-legged and declaring, "This is where empires bend." Schoolchildren learn about Nzinga not just as a queen but as a strategist, a negotiator, a poet, and a trickster. They study her letters, act out her speeches, and debate her decisions like she were still among them. But the scholarly debates? Oh, they've only gotten juicier. Some modern historians insist that Nzinga's early years as a Christian convert were entirely performative. Others argue she experienced genuine internal conflict, torn between survival and belief. Fringe theories suggest she may have orchestrated her brother's suicide as an early power grab. Others claim she wept for days after his death and wore mourning clothes longer than tradition required. You walk past a university wall where two students argue whether Nzinga was Machiavellian or maternal. One of them yells, "She weaponized compassion." The other counters, "She embodied resistance." They both have points. You move on, smiling. And beneath all these debates, the real story breathes, alive in the streets, in the songs, in the sly smiles of grandmothers who say, "That girl's got Nzinga's fire." Because it's not just about what she did. It's how she did it. She didn't storm in and demand power. She studied the rules, learned the languages, bowed when she had to, and stood taller every time she got back up. She turned captivity into leverage, turned enemies into pawns, turned thrones into symbols. Remember the missionary who said Nzinga's soul was divided? Turns out it was just layered, like tree bark, like river sediment, like strategy wrapped in silk. And her legacy isn't clean. She did, at times, allow the continuation of slave trading when it served her state's survival. She made alliances with colonial powers she knew would later betray her. She used propaganda. She ordered executions. She lied. She also fed her people, protected them, outwitted foreign generals, stared down empires without blinking, inspired thousands to rise and fight, held off Portugal for over 40 years with nothing but determination and, occasionally, a makeshift throne made of living muscle. Because survival, to Nzinga, was a performance. Every gesture was a message. Every silence was a sword. And so, the queen becomes more than memory, she becomes methodology. Her diplomatic tactics are taught in international relations seminars now. Her improvisational resistance strategies have influenced guerrilla movements. Her cultural preservation efforts? Early examples of anti-colonial identity resistance. One historian even calls her the blueprint for post-colonial sovereignty before colonialism was even done showing up. And while some scholars try to tidy her up, paint her as either saint or savage, her people remember her complexity. Because that's what real heroes are. They're messy, complicated, sharp-edged. You walk past a boy sketching the statue of Nzinga. He's drawing her with a cape and a lightning bolt in her hand. You ask him why. He shrugs. Because she could make storms. Fair enough. Back in the royal archives, deep in a shaded wing of the palace, you find one of Nzinga's last letters. The parchment is faded, the ink smudged, but her hand is unmistakable. It's addressed to the ones not yet born. She writes, "You will be told I was clever, dangerous, strange. They will call me queen, but never friend. Let them. You, who come after, remember this. When you have no seat at the table, make one. And if they offer you a stool while they sit on thrones, stand taller than them anyway. Sit where you must. Rise when you choose." You place the letter down, your hands tingling. Because even now, decades after her death, centuries removed, Nzinga is still teaching. Still negotiating. Still winning. And as the sun sets over the capital, casting golden light on her statue, her story refuses to end. It loops, comes back to test you, and waits to be retold. The breeze is warm tonight. You sit near a campfire, somewhere between the lands of memory and myth. The flames dance lazily, as if even they've grown tired in the wake of Nzinga's long, relentless story. But you're not alone. Around you, the past crowds in, not like a museum, but like a crowded dinner party where everyone's talking at once. And Nzinga? She's still here. Not in body, not even in statue, but in posture, in silence, in choices. Tonight, you listen closely to the final echoes of her life, not the battles, not the parades, but the small, unrecorded moments that slip between pages of history like water through fingers. Like the way she always fed her horses before herself, or how she used to carve lines into tree bark, little tally marks for every lie a Portuguese governor told her. Some trunks are still scarred with those silent scores. Or how she insisted every child born in her capital be registered by name, tribe, and village, so that, should the world forget them, at least the kingdom wouldn't. And yet, for every fact we do have, there's a question. Historians still argue whether Nzinga truly believed in the long-term survival of Matamba's independence, or whether she simply played for time, knowing the imperial tide was inevitable. Did she see herself as a stopgap? A shield to buy future generations a few more seasons of breath? Or did she believe, fiercely and perhaps foolishly, that a small African kingdom could outmaneuver an empire? You walk through her legacy like someone navigating a dense jungle, vines of truth, roots of myth, strange birds of speculation flying overhead. And just when you think you've reached a clearing, more questions. Take the servant throne. We know it happened, sort of. Portuguese records mention it. So do later biographies. But how exactly it went down? Nobody can agree. Some say the servant was pre-selected and part of a planned performance. Others claim it was an impulsive, defiant move, that Nzinga's cool demeanor masked a white-hot rage. One fringe theory even insists the Portuguese planted the idea, hoping to provoke her into a mistake. But what everyone agrees on is this: the message worked. And it stuck. You've probably seen memes of it, Nzinga on a human seat, captioned, "Take no nonsense." You've seen protest signs, graphic novels, even tattoo art inspired by that moment. It's strange how one act of resistance becomes 1,000 new expressions across centuries. But for Nzinga, it was just Tuesday. Because she wasn't living a legend. She was surviving, day by day, step by step. With every treaty she signed, every trap she laid, every sermon she faked. This wasn't grandeur. This was grit. And that grit? It spread. Other African leaders took note. The idea that women could command, negotiate, rule, that was Nzinga's viral export. Even in European circles, she became something of a fascination. Portuguese nobles gossiped about her ferocity the way people talk about celebrities now. Was she dangerous? Was she brilliant? Could they control her? Spoiler, they could not. And that fear? It lasted longer than her reign. Well into the 1700s, European powers included "watch for another Nzinga" clauses in their colonial documents. As if the very idea of her might rise again, reincarnated in another girl from another village. It did. Several times. Nzinga became shorthand for rebellion. Her name was sung in coded songs during later uprisings. Her tactics resurfaced in Angola's struggle for independence in the 20th century. One resistance leader reportedly told his captors, "I was raised by Nzinga's ghost." You believe him, because there's something unnervingly alive about her legacy. It doesn't rest. It shapeshifts. A throne one day, a whisper the next, a blueprint when you need it most. You watch a group of young women rehearse a play under torchlight. It's Nzinga's life, retold with drums and dance. The servant throne moment gets a full 10-minute segment, with exaggerated bows and mock gasps from the audience. But the girls laugh after, because they know it's more than drama. It's defiance. On repeat. They finish with a chant. Nzinga walked, so we could run. Nzinga rose, so we could rise. Nzinga sat, so we would never sit small. You clap. You can't help it. And you realize, the story doesn't belong to history books anymore. It's alive in the mouths of people who need it, who use it, who draw from it not because it's neat or noble, but because it's messy, human, and fierce. You get up and walk through the quiet, past the firelight, into the dark. The wind picks up. You hear night insects clicking softly. The earth feels warm beneath your feet. You imagine Nzinga's footsteps here once. So no hesitation. No apology. A woman who made empires sweat by standing still. A queen who turned diplomacy into a battlefield, and a servant into a throne. And somewhere, whether in memory, myth, or midnight wind, you swear she's still walking. Right beside you. And now, we let the story settle. The fire burns lower, its glow fading into soft embers, like the warmth of Nzinga's legend in the quiet corners of memory. The wind slows to a hush, and even the jungle seems to exhale with you, calm, still, no longer reaching for noise or conquest. You picture her, no longer the queen in armor, no longer the negotiator in silk, but just Nzinga, alone, older, sitting under a tree at dusk. Maybe her sandals are off. Maybe her knees ache from years of battle and diplomacy. But her eyes? Still sharp, watching the horizon, as if waiting to see what you'll do with everything she left behind. And maybe that's the point. She didn't build a kingdom so you'd praise her. She built it so you'd remember how to hold your own, even when the ground shifts, even when you're offered the floor instead of a chair. So, as your eyes grow heavy, take one last image with you. A queen, sitting tall, not because the throne was high, but because she chose to rise. And that means you can too. Wherever you are, whatever time it is. Yes, even if your bed's a mess and you forgot to brush your teeth, you've made space for this story. You carried it for a while. That counts for something. Now let it rest with you. Breathe slow. Let the tension in your shoulders melt. Imagine the world a little quieter, a little braver. The night a little deeper. You a little stronger. Because Nzinga? She's walked you this far. The rest is yours.